Welcome back to the Mystery Parlor with Anna
and Rose.
Today we are sharing the third Listener Stories episode with you. It is also the start of October, better known as our favorite month and spooky season.
Have you listened to our voodoo episode yet? If so, you know we were headed to a hard cider mill after we finished recording. Our bartender that day is the source of several of the stories in this episode. Plus, he shared a video with us of some ghostly shenanigans. We are also going to tell you about a personal encounter with a serial killer. Surprisingly, these two accounts are subtly linked together.
First of all, we want to give a shout out to Bennett's Orchard in Ottawa Lake, Michigan. Rose and I each had a flight of 5 hard ciders to try. My favorite is the Crisp Apple Crisp because it is so cinnamony. I ended up taking home a bottle of the Dust Bowl because it has no added sugar and still tastes great. Rose bought a growler of Disturbing the Peach, even though neither of us tried it. In our flights, let's just say we went back the next day to get more.
No, we are not drink or food critics, but we also grabbed a few bottles of Woodside Kitchen ketchup while we were there. We bought the black pepper, bacon, jalapeno, and ghost pepper flavors. Anna is on a no seed oil kick right now, and these have minimal ingredients and do not disappoint.
I have to add here that the ghost pepper is on fire. We went to Bennett's Orchard early, right after opening, so we pretty much had the place, or at least the cider room, to ourselves. Rose and I were talking about our upcoming episodes and asked our bartender, "What is the scariest thing that's ever happened to you?"
He said, "Nothing really."
"Have you ever seen a UFO?"
"No."
"Well, what about a ghost?"
"Well, yeah."
"And that's not scary?"
And he said, "No, I'm not afraid of anything."
We started cracking up and followed up with a "do tell," and here is what he said.
His first story happened shortly after his aunt died in a car crash when he was 6 years old. His dad was having a hard time sleeping and was awake and fully coherent in the middle of the night. On this particular night, the landline phone started ringing. In case you didn't know, caller ID was a new and big thing in the late 80s. No caller ID came up on the phone, so he didn't answer because, well, it was the middle of the night. But then it rang again and again.
His father decided to pick up due to the caller's persistence. What he heard left him in shock. He heard his recently deceased sister's voice through the phone. She said something like, "Why aren't you picking up?" And then she called him by a nickname that only she used to use. He hung up immediately, freaked out.
If that happened to you, what do you think you would do? Would you hang up or keep talking?
I will share something similar that I witnessed a few weeks ago. My husband Alan and I were out all day and late into the evening with Alan's brother and our sister-in-law. Her phone rang and it said the caller was Dad. But here is the thing. Her father passed away 2 winters ago. His phone had long been turned off. Even though Alan and her husband told her to answer, she said, "No, I'm too scared," and was overcome with emotion. Alan convinced her to call the number back about 10 minutes later. It did not go through. It was not a set-up phone number. She took it as a sign that her dad is still looking out for her.
Back to our orchard bartender, this story is not paranormal, but is still disturbing. When he was around 12 years old, he drove past a cemetery at night with his mother, just a few blocks from home. They saw a man standing under a tree, which was very unusual late at night in the dark. They spoke about it briefly and were both wondering why he was there. Shortly after arriving home, they heard a bunch of sirens. The next morning, they found out a man had hung himself from a short tree in the cemetery. So, in the end, he didn't see a man. He saw a corpse.
Oof. Corpse. You said corpse. Our bartender's next story, we will have to explain. We were lucky enough to watch it unfold as a video on his phone. Sadly, his brother passed away at age 26. Their mother had a drawer in her nightstand containing a box of the deceased brother's belongings.
At that time, they had a young nephew who, in this video, crawls over to the nightstand and goes into the drawer with the box of belongings. Anna says to use the saying, "Walk by one, talk by two," to gauge the age of young children. The child in the video is in the stage of both crawling and walking, still very wobbly and not able to form sentences.
This little toddler pulls out a lighter, points it to a photo on the nightstand, and even though he can barely talk, says, "Nick's." Yes, Nick is the person in the photo and his uncle who passed away. We should note that Nick had passed away several months prior, and it is unlikely that he would have remembered him. Then the toddler stumbles out into the hall, still holding the lighter. He stops at the stairs, sticks out his little arm like he's handing the lighter to someone even though there's nobody there, and says, "Nick."
We were really freaked out when we saw this whole thing go down on video. We have 2 more stories from our favorite bartender. The first comes from his sister. She and her husband had just bought a farmhouse nearby after the owner had passed away. As the new owners, they arranged an estate sale/auction to clear out the property and barn of all remaining possessions.
There had been a few bumps in the night and strange occurrences since they moved in, but they were not suspicious of anything paranormal. One time, a level that was hanging on the wall began to sway back and forth. It was unnerving enough that they decided to video record it. They also had electronics that were turning on and off, but they were still trying to brush it off as somehow explainable.
Actually, now that I'm reading this, I don't think it's a level. I think it's like a square or something. It doesn't have a bubble in it, like a regular level. Is it still called that?
I don't know. I think you might be right. I asked Alan because I showed him the video and I was like, "What is this thing?" And he said a drywall square or drywall level or whatever we just wrote. But I see your point. It doesn't have a little bubble, so
Who knows?
yeah.
Maybe someone can tell us. You can
Yes.
comment.
Yes, please.
Anyway, a very public occurrence happened the day of the auction. As the auctioneer was going to begin the bidding, a radio turned on and the volume turned up loud enough to disrupt the auction. Someone turned it back off and the bidding resumed. But the radio turned itself back on with the volume turned all the way up. The new owners, out of desperation, said out loud something like, "We love this place like you do, and promise to take care of it as long as we are here." And with that, the radio shut off.
Creepy and sweet at the same time. As far as we know, that was the end of interference from the deceased previous owner. At this point, on our visit to the orchard, we mentioned to our bartender that we just had a listener from nearby email their personal encounter story about a serial killer in the nearby city of Toledo, Ohio. It immediately reminded him of another family story.
He told us that a serial killer released from jail had been working at a nearby factory in Ottawa Lake. One day, one of his female family members spotted a creepy man in her driveway, so she called the cops. Guess who it turned out to be? Yes, the serial killer who was working nearby at the time. Even creepier, we realize that it's the same serial killer the mailman wrote to us about.
Could he have been stalking her like he did his other victims?
Our mailman's email submission went like this. "Hi Anna and Rose, I'm a Toledo mailman. When I'm on walking routes, homeowners and residents are often chatty and always offering me things. Drinks, snacks, weed. I only take them up on a cold water or Gatorade, in a new sealed bottle, of course."
He wrote, "On one particular route, a gentleman met me at the mailbox several times, always friendly and offering water. The first time I met him, he needed some help with getting his forwarded mail and making sure he did an address change correctly. A few months later, I was sharing the route with another mailman who asked if I was familiar with that particular address. I told him yes and reiterated the above information and asked why he wanted to know. That is when I found out the man I had several conversations with is a convicted serial killer.
When we received this email, Anna and I were shocked and a little skeptical. We were astonished to find out that a serial killer, especially a convicted one, was released from jail. His email went on to say that we should look this guy up, and his brother, who is still in jail. The mailman also informed us that this guy lives in close proximity to a school, and that one of his victims was only 12 years old. Anna and I decided we are not going to use the names of these two serial killers out of respect for the victims and their families. We will recount the stories and use the names of the victims instead.
These two serial killer brothers terrorized, raped, and killed so many people, we are still having a hard time understanding why one of them is walking free.
The first known killing was in May of 1980. The two brothers abducted 24-year-old Thomas Gordon and his girlfriend, 18-year-old Sandra Pogorski, and took them to a remote area. Thomas was shot and killed. Sandra was brutally raped, stabbed multiple times, and left for dead. Luckily, she survived and was able to give a description of her attackers to the police.
18 years later, it was the DNA from this case that was used to convict one serial killing brother in 1998. He lived free for 18 years before getting caught.
Spoiler alert, he only spent 20 years in jail and was released in 2018. This is the guy who our mailman met.
The next known murder was in the following year, January 1981. Was there really a break in the brutality between May of 1980 and January of 1981, or is it possible that other crimes have gone unsolved or other crimes were committed elsewhere? These monsters were long-haul truckers traveling the country, which leaves us wondering.
Connie Sue Thompson is their next known victim. She was from Michigan and picked up by the brothers while hitchhiking. She was raped, then killed by being stabbed 43 times. Her body was then thrown off of a bridge. Connie's body was found by two kids sledding.
Also in January of 1981, Cheryl Bartlett and her boyfriend, Bud Coates, were abducted by the serial killers. They were taken to an alley, then led into a garage. That is where they raped Cheryl and then told the two to embrace, saying it was going to be the last time they held each other. It is speculated that the brothers only had one bullet and they were hoping to kill both of them with it. The blast from the gun hit Cheryl and fragmented in her body, saving Bud from harm. Even though these two survived and were able to help police with details, there were no leads or arrests at that time.
We found this next known crime even more horrific. In February 1981, one of the serial killer brothers stalked a 12-year-old girl named Dawn Backus as she was walking home before he found the right spot to grab and abduct her. Then, with her in his truck, he went and picked up his brother. They took Dawn to a deserted theater that they knew very well. They had been stealing copper from the building. They took her to the basement where they raped her and then murdered her by repeatedly dropping a cinder block onto her head.
Dawn was a sweet girl, known for being gentle, friendly, fun, and respectful, with a caring heart of gold. She was just a child. Again, we feel the need to repeat, it seems so unfair that one of the rapists and serial killers only spent 20 years in jail.
In March of 1981, one of the brothers acted alone. This would be the brother that is still in jail. On this night, Scott Moulton and Denise Sadowski, both 21 years old, were working together at a grocery store and planned to go out and meet up with coworkers. They were abducted while leaving work together and taken to the Toledo suburb of Oregon, Ohio. Denise was raped and they were both shot and killed. Their bodies were found behind an apartment building inside of a car.
After a few-month lull, the serial killer brother that is still in jail acted again alone. We can't help but wonder if these men were on the road in their long-haul trucking careers during these rape and murder breaks in the timeline. Even scarier is their careers span many years and many states.
Another solo crime took place in August 1981. The innocent victims' names are Daryl Cole and Stacy Lynn Balanek. As with the last victims, they were both only 21 years old. Stacy was raped and they were both beaten to death with a baseball bat found in Stacy's car, before leaving their bodies to be found in the trunk.
The next victim was the niece to a police detective, and even though her murder is still unsolved, many believe she is another innocent murdered by one or both of the serial killing brothers. Her name is Michelle Hoffman, and she was taken from this world by blunt force trauma in September of 1981. She was found by a hunter a few days later.
The last known murder was again committed solo, which led to the arrest and conviction of the serial killer brother still in jail.
Also in September 1981, 20-year-old Leslie Sulwicki and her boyfriend, 21-year-old Todd Sabo, were parked just 2 blocks from the Ottawa Hills Police Department around 12:30 a.m. They were accosted by the serial killer brother, who tried to detain them both and rape Leslie. She was able to break free and called both the police and her father. Unfortunately, the police call was routed to Toledo instead of Ottawa Hills Department, only 2 blocks away. Leslie's father, Peter Sulwicki, got there before the police and was shot, causing his death.
The brother that murdered Peter Sulwicki got away, but was captured by police the following month in October of 1981. His fingerprints linked him to the crime, and he was found guilty and sentenced to life. We would like to mention that he is up for parole again in 2025.
The brother that was released in 2018, who our mailman met, was arrested in the mid-1990s for misdemeanors. At that time, DNA samples were taken. These samples, along with his incarcerated brother's DNA, were tested and used as evidence to convict the brothers for the 1980 crimes against Thomas Gordon, who was murdered, and the rape of his girlfriend, Sandra Podgorski, who was stabbed multiple times and left for dead.
Originally arrested for misdemeanors, he took a plea deal. He had to plead guilty to murdering Thomas Gordon and give details of 4 other murders in exchange for not being charged with them. The victims' families collectively allowed this deal, believing his sentence of 75 years in prison meant that he would likely stay in prison until his death. Unfortunately, they were sadly mistaken, and he was released on parole after only 20 years.
The brother still in jail, and we want to repeat, is eligible for parole in 2025, pled guilty to 8 murders and confessed to a crime the police hadn't yet connected him to.
In addition to the long string of murders starting in 1980, he confessed to shooting and killing Vicki Lynn Small, age 22, after sexually assaulting her in 1973. We found out that he was imprisoned from 1974 to 1979 for armed robbery. After he was released, the 2 brothers started committing crimes together in 1980.
Some in the police department think the murders were racially motivated. The serial killer rapist brothers do not have any known crimes against persons of their own race.
There's one more piece to this story we want to pass along to you. Remember, the mailman mentioned the serial killer brother he had met lived very close to his school? According to a WTVG Action News Toledo article from March 1st, 2019, he resides 694 feet from a Toledo school.
Guess what? Serial killers like this guy can live near a school as an exception if the crimes happened prior to the creation of the 1,000-foot school safe zone law put in place in July of 2003, protecting kids from sexual predators. You heard that right. Even though he raped and killed a 12-year-old with a cinder block, the law does not apply to him. He is allowed to live 694 feet from a kindergarten through 8th grade school. We also think it's sickening that his residence is also less than 2 city blocks or 0.06 miles from the address where he and his serial killer brother raped and killed that 12-year-old girl, Dawn Backus.
Our final thoughts on the serial killer brothers is that murder is a really dark subject. It's hard to understand how anyone could be that evil. It's also hard to understand how a serial killer could get out of jail. The one we've been talking about got out legally, and we hope that he spends the rest of his life as a law-abiding citizen.
As for our Bennett's Orchard bartender, his stories and videos were awesome. We have a little surprise for you. He airdropped us the video of the drywall, square, or level, or whatever it's called, swinging on a pegboard wall, all by itself in the haunted farmhouse his sister moved into. We got permission to share that video with you, along with a screenshot on my sister-in-law's phone when her deceased dad called.
You can check these out on our Mystery Parlor Instagram using the link in the description.
Thanks for listening. Bye for now.